All right, so today we're diving into some pretty ambitious stuff, making Europe great again. And we're not just talking about it. We've got a real plan.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, we've got this fascinating document. It's fresh out of the Élysée Palace, so straight from the source.
Mm.
It's called A New Agenda to Boost Competitiveness and Growth in the European Union.
Hmm.
So basically, this is like the blueprint for mega,
I like it.
right?
You know what's really interesting is the timing of this. It's not just some, random wish list. This is coming out at a pivotal moment. We've got new European elections coming up. The whole global landscape is shifting so fast.
Yeah.
And France and Germany are really, stepping up to the plate here.
So it sounds like they're acknowledging that Europe needs a serious boost when it comes to competitiveness.
Oh, absolutely. And they're not sugarcoating it either. The document lays it all out. The war in Ukraine really exposed some vulnerabilities. We've still got those pandemic aftershocks, and of course, climate change is looming large.
Right.
It paints this picture of a Europe that needs to adapt and adapt fast if it wants to keep up on the global stage.
I mean, it can't all be doom and gloom, right? What's the positive spin?
Oh, no, definitely not doom and gloom. More like a wake-up call.
Okay.
Acknowledge the hurdles, but also highlight Europe's incredible potential. I mean, think about it. Europe has a legacy of innovation,
Right.
a skilled workforce, not to mention a real commitment to sustainability.
Yeah.
This document really taps into those strengths,
Right.
proposes ways to leverage them for a serious comeback story.
This is where it gets really interesting, I think, for anyone listening. Because no matter where you fit in, business leader, policymaker, or just a passionate European citizen, this document shows how making Europe great again is a multi-level team effort.
It's like a puzzle, right? A massive puzzle with all these moving parts.
Okay, I like that analogy.
So you've got the European Union as one piece, setting the stage with smart policies, cutting that bureaucratic red tape, and prioritizing those crucial investments.
Yeah.
Think funding for renewable energy, digital infrastructure, even defense. They're talking about streamlining things like the Green Deal industrial plan to supercharge Europe's industrial base without sacrificing those environmental commitments.
So less paperwork headaches for businesses, more support for green initiatives.
Exactly. But it doesn't stop there. Each individual member country has a crucial piece of the puzzle, too. They're the ones translating those EU-level strategies into actual concrete actions on the ground.
So it's about each country playing to its strengths.
Yes, exactly. Like maybe one country excels at tech development, another's got sustainable agriculture down pat.
Right.
It's about identifying those strengths, tailoring that mega vision to their specific context, and creating a synergy where the whole is greater than the sum of its parts.
I like that. And where do businesses based in Europe fit into this whole puzzle metaphor?
Businesses, they're
Yeah.
vital. They're the engines driving innovation, generating growth, ultimately creating those jobs that lead to a more prosperous and, dare I say, happier Europe. But they need to embrace those big transitions that are happening right now, the digital and the green.
So adapt or get left behind.
Pretty much, yeah. The document really urges them to invest in R&D, adopt those cutting-edge technologies, and develop those sustainable practices,
Right.
which are becoming more and more important for consumers and investors alike.
Makes sense. And what about us, the everyday citizens? Where do we fit into all of this?
This is where that for the people part of MEGA really shines through. The document recognizes that Europe's greatest asset is its people.
Oh.
Their skills, their talents, and importantly, their well-being. It really emphasizes investing in education and training, recognizing qualifications across borders, making it easier for skilled workers to move where those opportunities are.
So not just making Europe, like, economically powerful, but making it a place where people actually want to live and work.
Exactly. Fostering that sense of optimism, of opportunity that maybe has been fading a bit in recent years.
Yeah. Okay, so we've got this multi-level puzzle. We see all the different pieces. But how do they propose actually putting it all together? Like, what are the specific strategies to make this happen?
They've got some pretty bold ideas. One that really jumps out is this push to eliminate those unnecessary bureaucratic burdens.
Okay.
They're talking about simplifying all those administrative procedures, cutting red tape, basically making it easier for businesses to operate and for citizens to navigate the system.
That's music to any entrepreneur's ears, I'm sure.
Yeah.
Less paperwork, more time to focus on growing their business.
Exactly. And on the investment front, they're talking about prioritizing those crucial areas that will really drive future growth. Renewable energy, digital technologies, even defense. They're looking at using EU funding strategically, but also attracting private capital.
So not just relying on government funding, but creating an environment that entices those private investors to put their money into Europe.
Exactly. And then there's this big emphasis on cutting-edge research and innovation. They're talking about promoting areas like AI, quantum computing, biotech stuff that sounds straight out of a sci-fi movie,
Yeah.
but is actually crucial for Europe to stay ahead of the curve.
Right. And what about the people side of things? How do they plan to boost the skills and well-being of those European citizens?
One interesting proposal is this idea of a European skills passport.
Mm,
Imagine your qualifications being recognized anywhere in the EU.
wow.
No more bureaucratic hurdles when you want to work in another country.
That would be a game changer for sure.
Right. And they're not just talking about mobility. They're also talking about upskilling and reskilling the workforce to meet the demands of those digital and green transitions.
So equipping people with the skills they need for those jobs of the future.
Precisely. And to make sure those opportunities actually exist, they're talking about strengthening the single market, addressing those fragmentation issues that have been holding back growth, and tackling unfair trade practices head on. They're also proposing to enhance the EU's overall trade policy, securing those vital supply chains, promoting sustainability, ensuring a level playing field on that global scale.
So it's about creating a more level playing field both within Europe and on that global stage.
Precisely. They're recognizing that for Europe to truly thrive, it needs to be competitive, not just within its own borders, but on a global level.
Okay, so there are a lot of moving parts here. But one thing that really stands out to me is this emphasis on creating a more inclusive and equitable society. It's not just about boosting the economy, it's about making sure everyone benefits.
Absolutely. They're talking about reducing inequality and promoting social mobility as crucial factors for long-term success. It's a recognition that a truly great Europe is one where everyone has the opportunity to thrive.
That's a powerful message,
Yeah.
and one that I think a lot of people will resonate with. But with all these grand ideas, how realistic is it to actually implement them? What kind of challenges might they face along the way?
Well, that's the million-euro question, isn't it? Some of these proposals are definitely more ambitious than others. Take achieving a truly integrated capital market across the EU. That's a complex beast to tackle. And then there's the question of political will. Getting all 27 member states on board with every single proposal is, well, let's just say it's going to require some serious diplomacy.
Yeah, I can imagine. So it's not just about having good ideas, it's about having the determination and the political savvy to actually see them through.
Exactly. And let's not forget about that ever-changing global landscape. Who knows what new challenges or opportunities might pop up along the way.
Right. It's about being adaptable and ready to adjust course as needed. But all in all, it seems like they've laid out a pretty comprehensive roadmap for making Europe great again.
Right. And the document doesn't just stop at laying out the plan. It's a call to action. It's a reminder that Europe has the potential to be a global powerhouse in the 21st century, but it's going to take bold decisions, smart investments, and a collective effort from all of us to get there.
Okay, so we've got the big picture, we've got that multi-level approach, we've got the key strategies, but let's zoom in a bit. How does this vision actually translate to the different actors involved? Let's start with the European Union itself.
For the EU, it's all about setting the stage, creating the right environment for all those other pieces to fall into place. They're the ones responsible for establishing those smart industrial policies, for cutting through the bureaucratic red tape.
So it's like they're the architects designing the blueprint for mega.
Exactly. They're the ones mapping out the overall strategy, but they're also responsible for providing a lot of the resources and support to make it all happen. Think of it as providing the funding, the legal framework, and the overall guidance for the individual member countries, businesses, and citizens to take the ball and run with it.
Okay, that makes sense. So what about those individual member countries? What's their role in all of this?
Think of them as the builders, the ones taking that blueprint and turning it into reality on the ground. They're the ones responsible for implementing those EU directives and regulations. But they also have a lot of freedom to tailor the approach to their own specific context.
So it's about taking the overall vision and making it work for their specific country.
Precisely. They need to identify their strengths, their areas for improvement, and then develop those targeted policies that support innovation and competitiveness within their own unique circumstances.
So it's like they're each building their own little piece of the mega puzzle.
Yeah.
But all those pieces need to fit together to create the whole picture.
Exactly. It's about finding that balance between national interests and European-wide goals. And of course, it's not just about governments doing their thing. Businesses have a huge role to play as well.
Okay, so let's talk about businesses. What's their part in making Europe great again?
They're the engines driving innovation, creating jobs, generating economic growth. They're the ones actually putting those mega strategies into action on a daily basis. But for them to succeed, they need to embrace those twin transitions we talked about earlier, digital and green.
So it's not just about doing business as usual. They need to be forward-thinking and adaptable.
Absolutely. They need to be investing in research and development, adopting those cutting-edge technologies, and incorporating sustainable practices into their operations.
So being competitive, but also being responsible.
Exactly. And it's not just about each individual business doing its own thing. Collaboration is key. They need to be working together, sharing knowledge, pooling resources, and building those strong partnerships that can really drive innovation and growth.
Okay, so we've talked about the EU, the member countries, the businesses. But what about the everyday citizens of Europe? What's their role in all of this?
This is where the for the people aspect of MEGA really comes into play. It's about empowering citizens, giving them the tools and the opportunities to contribute to this vision of a greater Europe.
So it's not just about top-down policies, it's about grassroots engagement.
Exactly. They're talking about fostering skills development, recognizing qualifications across borders, making it easier for people to move and work, where the opportunities are basically equipping citizens with the skills and the mobility they need to thrive in the 21st century.
So creating a Europe where people feel empowered and optimistic about the future.
Precisely. It's about fostering that sense of possibility, that belief that Europe can be a place where anyone can achieve their dreams. And that's not just good for individuals, it's good for Europe as a whole. A motivated and empowered citizenry is a key ingredient in any successful society.
Okay, I'm starting to see how all the pieces fit together. It's a complex puzzle, but there's a clear vision driving it all.
Right, and it's a vision worth striving for. A stronger, more competitive, and ultimately a happier Europe. Who wouldn't want to be a part of that?
Now, all of this sounds great in theory, but how does this vision translate into concrete actions? What are some of the specific things they're proposing to actually make this happen?
Well, they've got a whole laundry list of proposals, but let's focus on a few of the most impactful ones.
Perfect. That's exactly what I was hoping for.
First, they're talking about strengthening the Green Deal and Green Deal Industrial Plan. Remember, this is all about transforming Europe's industrial base, making it more sustainable and competitive in the global market. But they're also talking about streamlining it, making it less bureaucratic and more business-friendly.
So going green without getting bogged down in red tape. That's a win-win in my book.
Exactly. They're recognizing that environmental sustainability and economic growth don't have to be mutually exclusive goals. And speaking of cutting red tape, they're proposing to tackle that head-on across the board, simplifying administrative procedures, eliminating unnecessary bureaucratic burdens.
Now that's music to any entrepreneur's ears, I'm sure.
Right. They're trying to create a more agile and responsive system, one that fosters innovation rather than stifling it.
Okay, so less bureaucracy, more support for green initiatives.
hmm
What else is on their agenda?
Well, they're talking about boosting investment in some crucial areas. Renewable energy is a big one, obviously, given the need to transition away from fossil fuels and achieve energy independence. But they're also prioritizing digital technologies.
So things like high-speed internet, 5G networks, AI development, all that
Is-
good stuff.
Exactly. They recognize that digitalization is key to boosting productivity and competitiveness in the 21st century. And they're not forgetting about defense either. They're talking about strengthening Europe's defense capabilities and investing in new technologies to ensure its security in an increasingly uncertain world.
So it's about being prepared for any eventuality, whether it's a cyber attack or a more traditional military threat.
Precisely. They're taking a holistic approach to security, recognizing that Europe needs to be able to defend itself on multiple fronts.
Okay, that makes sense.
Mm,
But what about the people side of things?
Yeah.
How do they plan to invest in the skills and well-being of European citizens?
One of the most interesting proposals is this idea of a European skills passport. Imagine your qualifications recognized anywhere in the EU. No more bureaucratic hurdles when you want to work in another country.
That would be a game changer for sure. It would make Europe a much more mobile and dynamic workforce.
Exactly. And they're not just talking about mobility, they're also talking about upskilling and reskilling the workforce to meet the demands of the digital and green transitions.
So equipping people with the skills they need to thrive in the jobs of the future.
Precisely. They're proposing to invest in training programs, apprenticeships, and other initiatives to help people adapt to the changing job market.
Okay, so they're really focused on empowering people and giving them the tools they need to succeed.
Right. And they're not just focused on young people entering the workforce, they're also talking about promoting lifelong learning opportunities for people of all ages.
So it's about recognizing that learning doesn't stop when you finish school or university.
Exactly. In today's world, you need to be constantly learning and adapting to stay ahead of the curve.
Okay, I'm following you.
Yeah.
But let's shift gears a bit and talk about the economic side of things. They're talking about boosting competitiveness and attracting investment. How do they plan to do that?
They're tackling that from multiple angles. One key aspect is strengthening the single market.
Okay, remind me what the single market's all about.
Essentially, it's about creating a single unified market across all 27 member states of the EU. This means eliminating barriers to trade, such as tariffs and quotas, and harmonizing regulations so that businesses can operate seamlessly across borders.
So it's about making it easier for businesses to buy and sell goods and services across Europe.
Exactly. And it's not just about businesses. Consumers also benefit from the single market with a wider choice of goods and services at lower prices.
Okay, that makes sense.
Right.
It's not a perfect system.
Right.
They talk about fragmentation and the need to make the single market more robust.
You're right. Despite its successes, the single market is still fragmented in certain areas. They're talking about tackling those pesky issues that have been holding back growth and creating an uneven playing field.
So it's about identifying those weak spots and making the single market more efficient and effective.
Precisely. They're proposing to address issues like differing national regulations, bureaucratic hurdles, and a lack of cross-border investment.
Okay, I see. So strengthening the single market is one way they plan to boost competitiveness. What else is on their agenda?
They're also talking about attracting foreign investment. They want to make Europe a more attractive destination for businesses looking to invest and create jobs.
So competing with other regions of the world for those investment dollars.
Exactly. They're proposing to do this by creating a more favorable business environment.
What does that mean in practice?
Well, they're talking about things like reducing taxes, streamlining regulations, and improving infrastructure. They also want to create a more stable and predictable political environment.
So basically making it easier and more profitable to do business in Europe.
Precisely. They're trying to send a clear message to the world. Europe is open for business.
Okay, I'm getting the picture.
Yeah.
But it's not just about attracting investment from outside Europe.
Yeah.
They also talk about mobilizing domestic investment.
You're right. They're placing a lot of emphasis on encouraging European companies to invest in their own future. They're proposing a range of measures to support innovation and entrepreneurship, such as providing funding for research and development, creating incubators and accelerators, and promoting venture capital investment.
So fostering a more dynamic and entrepreneurial ecosystem within Europe.
Exactly. They want to create an environment where European businesses can thrive and compete on a global scale.
Okay, that makes sense. But it's not just about economic growth, right? They also talk about making sure that everyone benefits from that growth.
Absolutely. Social inclusion is a key theme throughout the document. They recognize that economic growth is not an end in itself. It's a means to an end.
So it's about creating a more just and equitable society.
Exactly. They're talking about the need to reduce inequality, promote social mobility, and ensure that everyone has the opportunity to participate in the economy and share in its benefits.
Okay,
Yeah.
I like that. But how do they plan to do that? What specific measures are they proposing?
Well, they're talking about things like investing in education and training, strengthening social safety nets, and promoting fair labor practices. They also want to create a more inclusive labor market where everyone has the opportunity to find a decent job, regardless of their background or circumstances.
So it's about creating a more level playing field and ensuring that everyone has a fair shot at success.
Precisely. They're recognizing that a more inclusive society is not just a moral imperative, it's also an economic one.
Okay, that's a powerful message. But let's shift gears a bit and talk about trade. They talk a lot about the importance of promoting free and fair trade.
You're right. They see trade as an essential engine of economic growth and prosperity.
So opening up markets and breaking down barriers.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But they're not advocating for unfettered free trade.
Yeah.
They emphasize the need for fair trade where everyone plays by the rules and the benefits are shared equitably.
So a level playing field for all.
Right.
Precisely. They talk about the need to enforce existing trade rules, address unfair trade practices, and ensure that trade agreements benefit all parties involved.
Okay, that sounds fair. But what about the impact of trade on jobs and the environment? Those are often raised as concerns.
Those are valid concerns, and they address them directly in the document. They acknowledge that trade can lead to job displacement in some sectors, but they argue that it also creates new jobs in other sectors.
So it's about managing the transition and ensuring that workers have the skills they need to adapt.
Exactly. They talk about the importance of investing in education and training to help workers transition to new jobs.
Okay, that makes sense. And what about the environmental impact of trade?
They emphasize the need to ensure that trade is conducted in a sustainable way, minimizing environmental damage and promoting responsible business practices.
So green trade.
Exactly. They talk about the need to incorporate environmental provisions into trade agreements, promote the trade of environmentally friendly goods and services, and combat illegal trade in wildlife and other natural resources.
Okay, so they're taking a holistic approach to trade, considering both the economic and environmental aspects.
Precisely. They believe that a balanced and sustainable approach to trade is essential for achieving both economic prosperity and environmental protection.
Okay, I'm following you. But how does all of this fit into the broader geopolitical context? The world is becoming increasingly multipolar, with new centers of power emerging. How does Europe plan to navigate this new landscape?
That's a crucial question. They talk about the need for Europe to assert itself as a global player, defending its interests and values on the world stage.
Not just reacting to events,
Wow.
but actively shaping the global agenda.
Exactly. They believe that Europe has a unique role to play in promoting multilateralism cooperation and a rules-based international order.
So standing up for the values that Europe represents.
Precisely. They talk about the need to strengthen Europe's diplomatic capabilities, enhance its security and defense cooperation, and build stronger partnerships with like-minded countries around the world.
Okay, that makes sense. But what about the specific challenges that Europe faces? They mentioned the war in Ukraine, the energy crisis and climate change as major threats.
You're right. Those are all major challenges that they address directly in the document.
So they're not shying away from the tough issues.
No, they acknowledge the severity of these challenges and outline a range of measures to address them.
Okay, let's dive into those. Starting with the war in Ukraine. How do they plan to respond to that?
They reiterate their unwavering support for Ukraine and their commitment to helping the country defend itself against Russian aggression.
So standing with Ukraine and providing practical assistance.
Exactly. They talk about providing financial, military, and humanitarian aid to Ukraine, as well as strengthening sanctions against Russia.
Okay, so a multifaceted approach to supporting Ukraine. What about the energy crisis? That's been a major concern for Europe, especially with the disruption of Russian gas supplies.
You're right. They recognize the urgency of addressing the energy crisis and outline a range of measures to reduce dependence on Russian energy and ensure a secure and affordable energy supply for Europe.
So diversifying energy sources and reducing reliance on a single supplier.
Exactly. They talk about accelerating the transition to renewable energy, improving energy efficiency, and building new energy infrastructure such as gas pipelines and LNG terminals.
Okay, so a long-term strategy for achieving energy independence.
Precisely. They also talk about the need for solidarity and cooperation among European countries to share energy resources and manage potential shortages.
So a collective response to a shared challenge.
Exactly. And finally, they address the challenge of climate change.
Okay, let's talk about that. Europe has been a leader in climate action, but it's facing increasing pressure to do more.
You're right. They reaffirm their commitment to the goals of the Paris Agreement and outline a range of measures to accelerate the transition to a net zero economy.
So doubling down on climate action.
Exactly. They talk about increasing investment in renewable energy, improving energy efficiency, promoting sustainable transport, and developing new technologies to capture and store carbon emissions.
Okay, so a comprehensive approach to tackling climate change. But how do they plan to pay for all of this? These are all very expensive undertakings.
They acknowledge the need for significant investment and outline a range of funding mechanisms, including public investment, private investment, and innovative financing instruments.
Okay, let's break those down. What about public investment?
On the public side, they propose leveraging existing EU funds, such as the European Investment Bank and structural funds. They also talk about exploring new sources of funding, such as a potential EU-wide carbon tax.
Interesting. And what about private investment?
They emphasize the need to create a favorable investment climate for green technologies and sustainable infrastructure.
So making it more attractive for businesses to invest in these areas.
Exactly. They talk about the need for clear and consistent regulations, streamlined permitting processes, and stable policy frameworks.
Okay, that makes sense. And what about these innovative financing instruments?
They mention things like green bonds, carbon contracts for difference, and public-private partnerships as potential ways to leverage private capital for climate action.
Okay, so a mix of traditional and innovative approaches to finance.
Exactly. They believe that a combination of these approaches will be needed to mobilize the necessary resources to achieve their ambitious climate goals.
This is all very impressive.
Yeah.
but it also sounds incredibly complex. How will they ensure that everything is coordinated effectively? There are so many different actors involved, from national governments to businesses to civil society organizations.
They emphasize the need for a strong and coherent governance framework to ensure that all of these different initiatives are aligned and working towards the same goals.
So a clear vision and a well-defined plan.
Exactly. They talk about the need for strong leadership, effective communication, and regular monitoring and evaluation to track progress and make adjustments as needed.
Okay, so accountability and transparency are key.
Absolutely. They believe that a strong governance framework is essential for building trust and ensuring that everyone is working together effectively.
This is starting to make more sense,
Right.
but I have to admit, I'm still a bit overwhelmed by the sheer scale and complexity of this vision.
I hear you. It's a lot to take in. But they're not expecting to achieve all of this overnight. They talk about the need for a phased approach, focusing on key priorities and building momentum over time.
So a step-by-step approach.
Exactly. They talk about prioritizing investments, focusing on areas where Europe has a competitive advantage, and building on existing strengths.
Okay, that sounds more manageable. But how do they plan to ensure that everyone is on board with this vision? It's going to require a lot of buy-in from different stakeholders.
They emphasize the importance of communication and engagement. They talk about the need to explain the benefits of this vision to citizens, businesses, and other stakeholders, and to involve them in the process of shaping and implementing the strategy.
So building a broad coalition of support.
Exactly. They believe that a shared sense of ownership is essential for success.
Okay, that's encouraging. We've talked a lot about the potential benefits of this vision, but what about the risks? What could go wrong?
That's a smart question. There are always risks associated with any ambitious undertaking. One potential risk is that they might overreach and try to do too much too quickly.
So spreading themselves too thin.
Exactly. They need to be careful to prioritize their investments and focus on areas where they have a realistic chance of success.
That makes sense. What other risks do they need to consider?
Another potential risk is that they might encounter resistance from vested interests who benefit from the status quo.
Ah, yes. Pushback from those who are comfortable with the way things are and don't want to see change.
Exactly. They need to be prepared to overcome this resistance and build a broad coalition of support for their vision. They also need to be mindful of the complexity of the challenges they face and be realistic about the timeframes involved.
So careful planning and realistic expectations are essential. Anything else?
They also need to avoid becoming too inward-looking. Europe is part of a globalized world, and its success depends on its ability to engage effectively with other countries and regions.
So striking a balance between domestic priorities and global engagement.
Good point.
Any other potential pitfalls?
They also need to be flexible and adaptable, willing to adjust their strategies as needed in response to changing circumstances. And finally, they need to guard against complacency. Success is not guaranteed. It requires constant effort and vigilance.
Okay, so a healthy dose of realism and determination is in order. But overall, it sounds like they've put a lot of thought into this vision. It's comprehensive, ambitious, and forward-looking.
It really is. It's a bold roadmap for a stronger and more prosperous Europe, but ultimately its success will depend on the commitment and collaboration of all stakeholders.
Absolutely. It's a collective effort. Everyone has a role to play in making this vision a reality.
And that brings us to our final thought for today. What can you do to contribute to this vision for a greater Europe? What can you do to contribute to this vision for a greater Europe?
Well, that's something for all of us to think about, right? But first, let's dig a little deeper into some of the specifics in this document. They talk a lot about promoting innovation, investing in research and development.
Yeah, they really see innovation as the key. The engine of economic growth, job creation, and social progress. It's like the foundation for everything else they're hoping to achieve.
Exactly. It's
Yeah.
all about recognizing that Europe's got some stiff competition out there.
Oh, for sure.
And they really believe that innovation is the way to maintain that competitive edge.
Oh, okay. That makes total sense. But what kind of innovation are they talking about? Is it focused on certain sectors or, specific technologies?
Well, they're taking a pretty broad approach, supporting innovation across a wide range of sectors, from manufacturing to healthcare to energy.
So it's not just about, one magic bullet solution.
No, not at all. It's more about creating an environment where new ideas can flourish no matter where they come from.
Right, casting a wide net.
Mm.
So are there any areas where they see Europe as having a particular advantage?
They highlight a few key areas where they believe Europe can really excel, like green technologies, digital technologies, and the bioeconomy.
Okay, let's break those down. Starting with green technologies. What makes Europe so well suited for that?
Well, Europe has a long history of environmental awareness and a strong commitment to sustainability.
Right.
Not to mention they're home to some of the world's leading companies in those areas.
Yeah, makes sense.
Renewable energy efficiency, clean transportation.
Mhm.
They really believe that Europe can become a global leader in the green technology sector, creating jobs and economic growth while also protecting the environment.
It's a win-win. Okay, what about digital technologies? What's their advantage there?
Well, Europe's got a strong research base in areas like artificial intelligence, data science, and cybersecurity.
Right.
And they've also got a large and sophisticated consumer market for digital products and services.
So they've got the brains and the market.
Exactly. And they believe they can leverage those strengths to become a global hub for digital innovation, attracting investment and creating those high-skilled jobs.
Sounds promising. Now, what about this bioeconomy? What is that exactly, and why are they so excited about it?
So the bioeconomy basically refers to the use of renewable biological resources, like crops, forests, and marine resources to produce food, energy, materials, all sorts of products.
So it's about using natural resources, but in a more sustainable way.
Exactly. And Europe's got a strong agricultural sector and a growing bio-based industry.
Mm.
So they're well positioned to capitalize on that.
Yeah, it seems like they're really trying to leverage their existing strengths in all these areas.
That's right. They believe Europe can become a leader in the bioeconomy, creating new jobs and industries, while also reducing reliance on those fossil fuels and non-renewable resources.
Okay, I'm getting it. But all this is going to require a lot of investment, right?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
They talk about the need to increase both public and private investment in research and development, as well as in actually deploying those new technologies.
So it's not just about coming up with the ideas. It's about actually putting them into practice.
Exactly. And they're proposing a number of funding mechanisms,
Yeah.
grants, loans, tax incentives, all designed to encourage that investment.
Okay, so they're putting their money where their mouth is. But it's not just about money, right? What else are they doing to promote innovation?
Well, they talk a lot about creating a more supportive regulatory environment for innovation,
Okay.
which means things like streamlining regulations, reducing bureaucracy, making it easier for businesses to bring those new products and services to market.
So cutting the red tape, making it easier to do business.
Exactly. And they also talk about fostering a culture of entrepreneurship and risk-taking.
So encouraging people to, be bold, think outside the box.
Precisely. They believe a more entrepreneurial culture will lead to more innovation and ultimately more economic growth.
Okay, I see how that all fits together. But let's zoom out for a second. What's the bigger picture here? What kind of Europe are they ultimately trying to create with all these efforts?
They envision a Europe that is strong, prosperous, and resilient. A Europe that's a leader in the global economy and a champion of its values on the world stage.
So a Europe that's not afraid to step up and take charge.
Exactly. They believe that Europe has a unique role to play in the world, and they want to make sure it has the strengths and resources to do that.
Okay, I like that. But it's not going to be easy, right? There are a
Yeah.
lot of challenges facing Europe, both internally and externally.
You're absolutely right. There are a lot of headwinds,
Yeah.
but they believe that Europe can overcome those challenges and emerge even stronger if it works together
Yeah.
and stays true to its values.
Okay, I'm feeling inspired. But before we wrap up, I want to go back to something they emphasize in the document, that idea of investing in people.
Yeah, that's a crucial part of their vision.
Sure.
They recognize that people are Europe's greatest asset, and they believe that investing in education, training, and skills development is absolutely essential.
So it's not just about pouring money into infrastructure and technology.
Right. It's also about investing in human capital.
Exactly. Because at the end of the day, it's people who drive innovation and progress.
That's right. They see education as the foundation for everything else, a strong and prosperous society. And they want to ensure that everyone has the opportunity to reach their full potential.
Okay, that sounds great in theory. But how does it translate into actual concrete actions? What are some of the things they're proposing to do?
They talk about a number of initiatives like improving the quality and accessibility of early childhood education.
So giving every child a good start in life.
Exactly. They also want to strengthen those vocational education and training systems. They believe that vocational education is essential for providing young people with the skills they need for the modern economy.
So preparing them for those jobs of the future.
Precisely. And they want to promote lifelong learning opportunities for all citizens.
Right, because learning doesn't stop when you graduate.
Exactly.
Yeah.
In today's world, you need to be able to adapt to those changing job markets and keep acquiring new skills.
Makes sense. And what about attracting talent to Europe?
Yeah, they talk about that too. They recognize that Europe's facing increasing competition for talent from other parts of the world,
Mm-hmm.
and they want to make Europe a more attractive destination for those highly skilled workers.
So making Europe a magnet for talent.
That's the goal.
Yeah.
And these are just a few of the ways they plan to invest in people.
Okay. It's an impressive list. But with so many things on their plate, how are they going to make sure that education and skills development actually get the attention they deserve?
Well, they recognize that investing in people isn't just a social issue. It's an economic imperative.
So it's good for business as well as for society.
Exactly. They believe that a highly skilled and educated workforce is essential for innovation, productivity, and competitiveness.
Okay, I'm with you on that. But let's be real here. Education systems can be pretty complex and slow to change.
Well, they know that.
So how are they going to ensure that their proposals actually lead to real improvements on the ground?
They talk about taking a multi-level approach involving national governments, regional authorities, educational institutions, everyone who has a stake in the game.
So a collaborative effort.
Exactly. And they also talk about the importance of monitoring and evaluation.
So making sure things are actually moving in the right direction.
That's right, holding themselves accountable for results. They believe that by working together and focusing on outcomes, they can really make a difference in the lives of Europeans.
Okay, that's encouraging. But I want to touch on one more point before we move on. They talk a lot about building a more inclusive and cohesive society. What does that actually mean in practice?
It means creating a society where everyone feels like they belong,
Mm-hmm.
regardless of their background, their beliefs, their circumstances.
So a society that truly embraces diversity.
Exactly. They talk about combating discrimination, promoting equal opportunities, fostering a sense of shared identity and purpose.
Okay, those are all worthy goals. But how do they plan to achieve them? Are they just talking the talk, or are they actually walking the walk?
Well, they propose a number of concrete measures like
Mm.
strengthening anti-discrimination laws and making sure they're actually enforced.
Mm-hmm.
They believe that everyone deserves equal protection under the law, regardless of their race, ethnicity, religion, gender, sexual orientation, or disability.
So basically making sure everyone is treated fairly.
Exactly. And they also want to promote equal opportunities in education and employment, all areas of life.
Leveling the playing field.
Right. They believe that everyone should have the same chances to succeed, regardless of their background.
Hmm.
And they also want to foster intercultural dialogue and understanding.
So breaking down those barriers between different communities.
Exactly. Promoting respect for different cultures and beliefs, creating opportunities for people to interact and learn from each other.
Okay, I like that. And what about immigrants and refugees?
Yeah, they talk about supporting their integration as well.
Yeah.
They see immigration as a potential source of strength for Europe, but they recognize the importance of making sure newcomers feel welcomed and integrated.
So creating a more inclusive environment for everyone.
That's the goal. And those are just a few of the ways they're planning to build a more inclusive and cohesive society.
Okay, it's a pretty ambitious agenda. Are they being realistic, though? I mean, these are complex social issues that have been around for a long time.
You're right, there are no easy answers. But they believe that by working together and staying committed to these goals, they can make a real difference.
Okay, I'm hopeful. But, there are a lot of forces at play in Europe that are pushing in the opposite direction,
Right.
towards division and exclusion. How do they plan to counter that?
They believe that the forces of hope and unity are stronger. And they see this document as a call to action, a rallying cry for a more inclusive and prosperous Europe.
Okay, I like that, a call to action. So what can ordinary citizens do to answer that call? What role can they play in making this vision a reality?
That's a great question, and one we should all be thinking about. But first, let's dive into some of the specific things they're proposing to strengthen Europe's industrial base.
Okay, so we're talking about revitalizing European manufacturing.
Exactly. But not in the way you might think. They're not talking about bringing back the old industries of the past. They're focused on supporting the development of new, innovative industries, those that are at the forefront of the green and digital transitions.
So focusing on the industries of the future.
Exactly. They talk about the need to support those key enabling technologies like artificial intelligence, robotics, advanced materials.
Laying the groundwork for a more advanced industrial sector.
Exactly.
Yeah.
They also talk about strengthening European value chains.
Value chains. Remind me what those are again.
So value chains are basically all the different stages involved in producing something, from the initial design all the way to delivering it to the
I
customer.
gotcha. And how do they plan to strengthen those chains?
Well, they talk about diversifying sources of supply, reducing dependence on single suppliers, and promoting closer collaboration between European companies.
So making those industries more resilient.
Right, less vulnerable to those external shocks. They also talk about reshoring and nearshoring.
Okay, I've heard those terms, but can you refresh my memory?
Sure. So reshoring is basically bringing back production that was previously outsourced to other countries.
Okay.
And nearshoring is similar, but it involves moving production closer to home, like to neighboring countries in Europe.
So they're trying to bring more manufacturing back to Europe.
Exactly. They believe that this will create jobs, boost economic growth, and strengthen Europe's strategic autonomy.
Okay, I can see the logic there. But what about the cost? Isn't manufacturing more expensive in Europe than in other parts of the world?
That's a valid concern,
Mm.
but they argue that Europe can compete on quality, innovation, and sustainability.
So focusing on higher value products and services.
Precisely.
Yeah.
They also talk about investing in automation and digitalization to improve efficiency and reduce costs.
Using technology to their advantage.
Exactly. They believe that by focusing on these areas, Europe can build a thriving industrial sector that is both competitive and sustainable.
Okay, that's encouraging. But what about the environmental impact? They're talking about boosting industrial production, but they're also committed to tackling climate change. How do they reconcile those two goals?
That's a great question. And sustainability is a key theme throughout the document. They emphasize the need to decarbonize European industry and make it more circular.
Okay, break that down for me. What does decarbonizing industry actually mean?
Decarbonization basically means reducing those greenhouse gas emissions from industrial processes.
Okay.
So this could involve switching to cleaner energy sources, improving energy efficiency, developing new technologies to capture and store carbon.
Makes sense. And what about circularity?
Circularity is about reducing waste and keeping those materials in use for as long as possible. So things like recycling, reusing, repairing products, but also designing products from the start to be more durable and easier to recycle.
So it's about minimizing the environmental impact of industry.
Exactly. They believe that a green and sustainable industrial sector is essential for achieving those climate goals and ensuring a healthy planet.
Okay, I'm with you. But with so many different initiatives and priorities, how are they going to make sure that everything is actually coordinated effectively?
Well, they emphasize the need for a strong and coherent industrial policy at the European level.
So like a master plan to guide industrial development.
Exactly. They talk about setting clear objectives, identifying those strategic priorities, and providing targeted support for key sectors and technologies.
So kind of like picking winners and losers.
Not necessarily. It's more about identifying areas where Europe has a competitive advantage and giving those sectors the support they need to thrive.
Okay, that makes more sense. What about the role of individual member states? Don't they have their own industrial policies as well?
They do, but they stress the need for closer coordination between national and European policies.
So working together rather than competing against each other.
Exactly. They believe that a more coordinated approach will be much more effective.
Okay, I'm starting to see how all the pieces fit together. But with so many ambitious goals, how will they actually measure their progress?
They talk about developing clear metrics and indicators to track progress and ensure accountability.
So no vague promises. They're actually going to measure results.
That's the plan. They also talk about regular reviews and evaluations to make adjustments as needed.
So it's not just a set it and forget it kind of thing. They're willing to adapt.
Exactly. They recognize that the world is constantly changing and they need to stay flexible and responsive.
Makes sense. But all of this sounds like it's going to require a lot of investment.
You're right. They acknowledge that achieving these goals will take significant financial resources.
So where's all that money going to come from?
They talk about mobilizing both public and private investment.
Okay, break it down for me. What about the public side?
On the public side, they're talking about using existing EU funding mechanisms like the European Investment Bank's structural funds, the Horizon Europe Research Program.
So basically redirecting existing funds towards these new priorities.
Exactly. They also talk about exploring new sources of funding, like a potential EU-wide carbon tax.
Interesting. Okay, and what about attracting private investment?
Well, they emphasize the need to create a more favorable investment climate in Europe.
So making it more attractive for businesses to invest.
Exactly. Which means reducing bureaucracy, fostering innovation, and ensuring a stable regulatory framework.
So making Europe more business-friendly.
That's the idea. They also talk about completing the Capital Markets Union, which would make it easier for businesses to access funding across borders.
Okay, that makes sense. But attracting investment is only one part of the equation. They also need to make sure that everyone benefits from that growth.
Absolutely. And that's where social inclusion comes in. It's a key theme throughout the document.
So it's not just about boosting GDP.
No, they're also focused on the well-being of all
Yeah,
citizens.
good to hear.
They talk about investing in education and training, creating quality jobs, providing a strong social safety net.
So building a more equitable and inclusive society.
Exactly. They believe that's essential for long-term economic sustainability.
Makes sense. Let's talk a bit about trade. They emphasize free and fair trade quite a bit.
Yeah, they see trade as a major engine for growth and prosperity.
So opening up those markets, breaking down barriers.
Exactly. But they're not talking about just any kind of free trade.
Right.
They're emphasizing fair trade where everyone plays by the rules and the benefits are shared equitably.
So a level playing field?
Precisely. They talk about enforcing existing trade rules, addressing those unfair practices, and making sure trade agreements benefit everyone involved.
Okay, but what about the impact of trade on jobs and the environment? Those are big concerns for a lot of people.
They acknowledge those concerns and they address them head-on in the document. They know that trade can lead to job displacement in some sectors, but they argue that it also creates new jobs in other sectors.
So it's about managing that transition.
Exactly. And making sure workers have the skills they need to adapt. They talk about investing in education and training to help workers move into those new jobs.
Okay, and what about the environmental side of things?
They're very clear about the need for sustainable trade practices. They want to minimize environmental damage and promote responsible business practices.
So green trade is the goal.
Exactly. They talk about incorporating environmental provisions into trade agreements, promoting those environmentally friendly goods and services, and combating that illegal trade in wildlife and natural resources.
Okay, so they're taking a holistic approach to trade, considering both the economic and the environmental aspect.
Precisely. They believe that a balanced and sustainable approach is the key to achieving both economic prosperity and protecting the environment.
Okay, I'm following you. But how does all of this fit into the broader geopolitical landscape? The world is changing, right? We're seeing new centers of power emerging. How does Europe plan to navigate that?
That's a really important question. And they address it directly in the document. They talk about the need for Europe to assert itself as a global player, defending its interests and values on the world stage.
So not just reacting to events, but actively shaping the agenda.
Exactly. They believe that Europe has a unique role to play in promoting things like multilateralism cooperation, a rules-based international order.
So standing up for those values that Europe represents?
Precisely. They talk about strengthening Europe's diplomatic capabilities, enhancing its security and defense cooperation, and building those stronger partnerships with like-minded countries.
Okay, that makes sense. But what about the specific challenges Europe is facing right now? Things like the war in Ukraine, the energy crisis, climate change. Those are some pretty big threats.
You're right. And they address all of those head-on in the document.
So they're not shying away from the tough stuff.
No, they're not. They acknowledge the severity of those challenges, and they lay out a range of measures to address them.
Okay, so let's take them one by one. Starting with the war in Ukraine. How are they responding to that?
They reiterate their unwavering support for Ukraine and their commitment to helping the country defend itself.
Okay.
They talk about providing financial, military, and humanitarian aid to Ukraine, as well as strengthening those sanctions against Russia.
So a multi-pronged approach. What about the energy crisis? That's been a major issue for Europe.
Absolutely. And they recognize that they outline a range of measures to reduce Europe's dependence on Russian energy and ensure a secure and affordable energy supply.
So finding alternative sources, reducing reliance on that single supplier?
Exactly. Things like accelerating the transition to renewables, improving energy efficiency, and building new infrastructure like gas pipelines and LNG terminals.
Okay, so a long-term strategy for energy independence.
Right. And they also emphasize the importance of solidarity and cooperation among European countries.
Sharing resources and working together.
Exactly. And then, of course, there's climate change.
Right. Europe's already been a leader in climate action, but they're facing a lot of pressure to do even more.
And they're stepping up to the challenge. They reaffirm their commitment to those Paris Agreement goals, and they outline a range of measures to accelerate the transition to a net zero economy.
So doubling down on their climate commitments.
That's right. Things like increasing investment in renewable energy, promoting sustainable transport, and developing new technologies to capture and store those carbon emissions.
Okay, it sounds like they're really covering all the bases, but these are all expensive undertakings.
Yeah, they know that. They acknowledge the need for significant investment, and they lay out a range of ways to finance it.
So public investment, private investment, innovative financing instruments.
It's going to take a combination of approaches.
Makes sense. So let's talk about those public investments. What are they proposing?
Well, they talk about leveraging those existing EU funds, like the European Investment Bank, structural funds, and they're also looking at new sources of funding, like a potential EU-wide carbon tax.
Interesting. What about attracting private investment?
Well, they emphasize the need to create a more favorable investment climate in Europe.
Oh.
So, reducing bureaucracy, fostering innovation, ensuring a stable and predictable regulatory environment.
Making Europe a more attractive place to do business.
Exactly. And they talk about the importance of completing that capital markets union, which would make it easier for businesses to access funding across borders.
Okay, but attracting investment is only half the battle, right? They also need to make sure that the benefits of growth are shared widely.
You're absolutely right. And that's why they emphasize social inclusion throughout the document.
So it's not just about growing the economy for its own sake.
No, it's about making sure that everyone benefits.
Good.
They talk about investing in education and training, creating good jobs, providing a strong social safety net.
So building a more equitable society.
Exactly. And they see that as a key part of ensuring long-term economic sustainability.
Okay, so it's not just about growing the economy for its own sake.
No, it's about making sure that everyone benefits.
Good.
They talk about investing in education and training, creating good jobs, providing a strong social safety net.
So building a more equitable society.
Exactly.
Yeah.
They see that as a key part of ensuring long-term economic sustainability.
Makes sense. Let's switch gears a bit and talk about trade. They emphasize free and fair trade quite a bit.
Yeah, they see trade as a major engine for growth and prosperity.
So opening up those markets, breaking down barriers.
Exactly. But they're not talking about just any kind of free trade.
Right.
They're emphasizing fair trade, where everyone plays by the rules and the benefits are shared equitably.
So a level playing field.
Precisely. They talk about enforcing those existing trade rules, addressing unfair practices, and making sure those trade agreements benefit everyone involved.
Okay, but what about the impact of trade on jobs and the environment? Those are big concerns for a lot of people.
Yeah, they acknowledge those concerns, and they address them head-on in the document. They know that trade can lead to job displacement in some sectors, but they argue that it also creates new jobs in other sectors.
So it's about managing that transition.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And making sure workers have the skills they need to adapt. They talk about investing in education and training to help workers move into those new jobs.
Okay, and what about the environmental side of things?
They're very clear about the need for sustainable trade practices, minimizing environmental damage and promoting responsible business practices.
So green trade is the goal.
Exactly. Incorporating environmental provisions into trade agreements, promoting those environmentally friendly goods and services, and combating that illegal trade in wildlife and natural resources.
Okay, so they're taking a holistic approach to trade, considering both the economic and the environmental aspects.
Precisely. They believe that a balanced and sustainable approach is the key to achieving both economic prosperity and protecting the environment.
Okay, I'm following you. But how does all of this fit into the broader geopolitical landscape? The world is changing, right? We're seeing new centers of power emerging. How does Europe plan to navigate that?
It's a really important question,
Yeah.
and they address it directly. They talk about the need for Europe to assert itself as a global player, defending its interests and values on the world stage.
So not just reacting to events, but actively shaping the agenda.
Exactly. They believe that Europe has a unique role to play in promoting things like multilateralism cooperation, a rules-based international order.
So standing up for those values that Europe represents?
Precisely. Strengthening Europe's diplomatic capabilities, enhancing security and defense cooperation, and building stronger partnerships with like-minded countries.
Okay, that makes sense. But what about the specific challenges Europe is facing right now? Things like the war in Ukraine, the energy crisis, climate change. Those are some pretty big threats.
You're right. And they address all of those head-on in the document.
So they're not shying away from the tough stuff.
No, they're not. They acknowledge the severity of those challenges, and they lay out a range of measures to address them.
Okay, so let's take them one by one. Starting with the war in Ukraine, how are they responding to that?
They reiterate their unwavering support for Ukraine and their commitment to helping the country defend itself, providing financial, military, and humanitarian aid to Ukraine, as well as strengthening those sanctions against Russia.
So multi-pronged approach. What about the energy crisis? That's been a major issue for Europe.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And they recognize that they outline a range of measures to reduce Europe's dependence on Russian energy and ensure a secure and affordable energy supply.
So finding alternative sources, reducing reliance on that single supplier.
Exactly. Things like accelerating the transition to renewables, improving energy efficiency, and building new infrastructure like gas pipelines and LNG terminals.
Okay, so a long-term strategy for energy independence.
Right. And they also emphasize the importance of solidarity and cooperation among European countries.
Sharing resources and working together.
Exactly. And then, of course, there's climate change.
Right, Europe's already been a leader in climate action, but they're facing a lot of pressure to do even more.
And they're stepping up to the challenge, reaffirming their commitment to those Paris Agreement goals and outlining measures to accelerate the transition to a net zero economy.
So doubling down on their climate commitments.
That's right. Increasing investment in renewable energy, promoting sustainable transport, and developing new technologies to capture and store those carbon emissions.
Okay, it sounds like they're really covering all the bases, but these are all expensive undertakings.
Yeah, they know that. They acknowledge the need for significant investment, and they lay out a range of ways to finance it. Public investment, private investment, innovative financing instruments.
It's going to take a combination of approaches.
For sure. So let's talk about this public investment. What are they proposing?
Yeah, what are they thinking?
Well, they talk about leveraging existing EU funds like the European Investment Bank structural funds, the Horizon Europe Research Program.
So basically redirecting existing funds towards these new priorities.
Exactly. They also talk about exploring new sources of funding, like a potential EU-wide carbon tax.
Interesting. What about attracting private investment?
They emphasize the need to create a more favorable investment climate in Europe, reducing bureaucracy, fostering innovation, ensuring a stable and predictable regulatory environment.
So making Europe a more attractive place to do business.
Exactly. And they talk about the importance of completing the Capital Markets Union, which would make it easier for businesses to access funding across borders.
Okay, but attracting investment is only half the battle, right? They also need to make sure that the benefits of growth are shared widely.
You're absolutely right. And that's why they emphasize social inclusion throughout the document.
So it's not just about boosting GDP, it's about making sure that everyone benefits from this growth and feels like they're part of this grand vision for a greater Europe.
Exactly. And that's really the key takeaway here. This isn't just about economics. It's about creating a Europe that's stronger, more prosperous, and more inclusive. A Europe where everyone has the opportunity to thrive.
That's a powerful message, and one that I think will resonate with a lot of people. It's not just about making Europe great again. It's about making it great for everyone.
Well said. And on that note, I think we've covered a lot of ground today. Thanks for joining me on this deep dive into what it could truly mean to make Europe great again.
The pleasure was all mine. As always, it's been a fascinating conversation. I'm really curious to see how this vision unfolds in the years to come.
Me too. And to all of you listening out there, we want to hear your thoughts. What do you think about this vision for Europe? What are your hopes and concerns? Join the conversation online using #TheDeepDive and #Mega. Let's keep this discussion going and work together to build the Europe we want to see.